If an undergraduate came to you and was just getting started and asked for advice with respect to future opportunities, what would you tell them?
In nanotechnology?
Yes.
Yeah, it happens every day. I've had over 100 undergraduates do research in our labs, in my personal labs at Northwestern over the last 20 years. I think it's an incredible land of opportunity. And the reason is very simple. First, within this area, we teach you how to do science properly, how to break down a problem, how to solve a problem, regardless of your core expertise. And I think that's an important observation. So we teach people to go find complementary expertise that allows them to be better in terms of trying to solve the problem that they're focusing on. The second is we try to train people to not just do science, but to think about what I could do if I actually solve that particular problem. What does that new information allow me to do? What does that new structure, new material allow me to do that I couldn't do before? This way of doing science, engineering, and medicine under the nanotechnology umbrella, I think, is an incredible training ground and one that prepares young people to pursue careers that I think will be very rewarding for them, regardless of their subdiscipline of interest. The neat thing about this is you can be primarily a chemist or primarily a physicist or primarily a biologist and be a nanotechnologist. You just learn how to work with the other groups to make sure that you have all of the capabilities you need to solve the problems that you're trying to address.
Well, there's two issues. And in fact, I actually get asked quite often by young people what it is that they should be studying specifically to get into nanotechnology. And what I tell them is study any field of science or technology that seems interesting to you, but make sure that you spend a lot of time learning how to communicate. Take writing classes, take speech classes, learn how to communicate with somebody who doesn't use your vocabulary. That's probably the most important thing that can happen. And in many ways, in my own career, it's why I wound up rising where I did within the Hewlett-Packard company. It wasn't that I was the smartest person around, but I could usually explain somebody else's work better than they could to the local boss.
I have many undergraduates in my laboratory, and they come from a variety of fields. And I also teach the honors freshman class at UCLA and place each student in that class in a laboratory by the time our 10-week quarter is done. So my recommendation is always go deep in a field, learn that thoroughly and become deep in that area, learn to be a scientist or engineer or clinician, but then also keep an open mind and go out to seminars in other areas, get on the lists for different departments in science, engineering, and medicine. Go to those seminars, do a little bit of homework in advance, reading the speakers' papers so you know something about what they'll be covering during their talks, and then look for what interests you and find how you can contribute to that effort with the different training often that you'll have. If you trained in one area, if you go work in a laboratory in a different area, you'll bring something unique to that laboratory, even at the undergraduate level. And so I strongly encouraged people to get significant and deep training on the one hand, and then look for what gets them excited to get out of bed every morning and run in the lab to get on with their research in order to see how they're able to contribute.
In general, do you have advice for young entrepreneurs on kind of a bigger picture that you might want to share?
You have to, at once, have the vision for what you know the project could offer, but also be able to troubleshoot as you go and to be willing to listen and adapt, but not get dissuaded. And so it's this sort of delicate balance of being the visionary and being persistent and being focused, but also be willing to be nimble and adaptive so that you can sort of place your vision in a larger landscape, as it unfolds in front of you. And in some ways, that's really just like research, sort of an idea of, how the project you're doing is going to work out and why it might be important. But as the data comes and as the field unfolds before you change and you adapt, and you might ask a slightly different question or generate a different hypothesis. And so, it's a sort of a similar skill, but I think you have to have this sort of paradox of being the visionary and the problem solver at the same time.
In terms of raising money, raising capital is very important. And I think it's important to understand that as founders, we look at ourselves as supplicants looking for financing and, in essence, quote unquote, begging for money with hat in hand. But the truth is, really, being on the other side, I can tell you, VCs and private equity funds and professionals, they are desperate to put money to work. They have tremendous pressure to do so. Their jobs are on the line, and they have a tremendous amount of money to put to work. But you have to check the right boxes first. That's good idea, a good concept, a fantastic management team. You have to have a deep bench, differentiating factors, compelling technology, scalability, etc. If you can check those boxes, the money is virtually unlimited. I would say it's easy to get excited in the beginning of any project. You're starting a company. There's nobody who isn't excited. But it's important to be extremely honest and very self-critical with yourself and your idea from the get-go on these points.
I have a lot of advice. I think one piece of advice would be to really focus on where the big problems are in society and where you can add value with your expertise. But equally important to maintaining a sustainable company, not only do you have to add value, but you have to be able to capture that value. So you have to have a business model that allows you to monetize the value that you're bringing. And I'd say the second big piece of advice is to recognize that it's the team that makes the company. So my philosophy is you only hire the best people, even if that means that you're understaffed for some periods of time. I've found that it's worth it to wait for the right people to make sure that you have the right team.
I would encourage them to find mentors. There are a lot of folks who have been there and done that before. So they have a good understanding of entrepreneurship, taking an idea, moving it along, getting a patent, figuring out how to leverage the startup ecosystem that's available to them and chart a path forward. And a lot of times when I'm talking with students, that's the advice that I give them. I start back at where I was and say, first off, it's okay for you to think about this. Not everyone is going to go through their academic career and end up in an academic environment. Many of us are going to end up in industry. Many of us can go on and start companies. That is an okay career path. However, here are some of the risks, and this is how you try to de-risk the entrepreneurship process at every step. There are a lot of things that you can do to increase your probability of success, to decrease the potential of a catastrophic failure. And I think the fear of those types of failures is what often holds people back, and that doesn't need to be the case. I had no experience with entrepreneurship whatsoever when I got started. You kind of have to be a little bit obsessive about your idea. You've got to be very passionate about it. And when you have this idea that won't go away and it keeps coming up and you're thinking about it, that's probably a good indicator that it's not going to go away until you try to do something about it. And in my case, it was starting a company. So I think students needing to understand that they don't have to be experts in this process. They can start from where they are and learn the ropes and find mentors and take the steps that they need to grow their idea one step at a time, and it could potentially end up being something wonderful.
Thank you for joining us today for this special 15-year anniversary edition of Stories from the NNI. If you would like to learn more about nanotechnology, please visit nano.gov or email us at info@nnco.nano.gov. And check back here for more stories.